It is time now for the Burning Platform, which is our opportunity to catch up on all the big stories in the news, to talk about all the things that are going on, to speak to people who know what's going on, and to also get their expertise, their advice, their ideas, their analysis, and all the rest of it. It's been an interesting week. It's never a boring week in South Africa, I'm pleased to say. It's never a boring week in the world. We've never sat here with the Burning Platform, have we, Phumlani, and gone, don't know what to talk about.
What shall we talk about today?
Yeah. It's almost as if we've got a glut. We're spoiled for choice. And this morning, we're also...
there are things we never get to talk about because there's so much shit going on.
Spot on. So this morning, we're joined by two people who are no strangers to our show. The first of these is Phumlani Majozi, a senior fellow at African Liberty and also a commentator on politics, economics, and global affairs. And he joins us live this morning. How are you, Phumlani? Nice to see you.
I'm well, Gareth. Well, for me, it's great to see you. It's great to be back in 2022.
Very, very
good. Hello.
Yes. We can follow Phumlani on Twitter at Phumlani M. Majozi. And don't be surprised when you follow him that you will encounter huge firestorms of people who love and hate him, because that's exactly how it goes. He's no stranger to controversy and has been cancelled by the mob at least 200 times, but he keeps rising from the ashes like a phoenix. So good to have you here. And speaking of people who get cancelled all the time or who get into fights all the time on social media, Giulietta Talevi is no stranger to us. She's also, last time I saw you, Giulietta, I think was on my TV show. And,
that was a fun time.
There was a fun time.
And you got into a whole lot of trouble, didn't you, for having that lunatic on your show? But
but yes, you actually tweet. I saw you tweet about this the other day. Someone sent me the screenshot. You said, "Goodness me, I recall all the shrieking over nutcase David Icke appearing on Gareth's show 2 years ago. I wonder if there's a similar outrage tonight over the untrammeled anti-vax delirium that our former Chief Justice is currently spouting on JJ Tabane's show. Because Mogoeng was on. I didn't know this. He's a massive anti-vaxxer.
He's rabid.
How did you miss it?
I didn't. I don't follow Mogoeng's every move like you and Giulietta do.
What?
Yeah, we're stalkers.
He even had a massive prayer.
Judicial
he even had
stalkers.
a massive prayer about it and about the vaccine and about the vaccine and the nefarious work of the devil. And if this vaccine is that, those were his words, not my words, his words.
So
if it comes from the devil.
Was there an uproar? Was there an outrage? Did people go crazy and claim that JJ Tabane was spreading misinformation and disinformation? No? No.
Not that I saw, no.
No, of course not. But, I bring on the world's most famous conspiracy theorist to talk about conspiracy theories. And then obviously I become the anti-vaxxer by
association.
I mean, even though I've had 2 shots of the Pfizer, I'm an anti-vaxxer. So yeah, call it what you will. All right. So Giulietta, you're jumping straight into some controversial issues here, but we've got lots to talk about with both you and Phumlani this morning. Let Phumi maybe set the first direction of the agenda this morning. So Phums, where do you want to start today? Because I always take the reins here, and it's maybe your turn.
It's just now that we're talking about the Chief Justice, I'm interested to know if, Giulietta, you watched the whole thing and what your view was on
I did,
what he said.
Yeah, I didn't actually. I actually had to switch off. I thought this is just pure rubbish, really. Look, I mean, I suppose. Actually, I don't. It was kind of indefensible. And maybe JJ Tabane, who's pretty hard hitting a lot of the time, didn't kind of push back enough. What was very interesting, and I think someone on Twitter have mentioned it. Did you see the background? It was sort of the fire burning.
The fireplace.
The portal to hell. Do not enter, ye anti-vax. It was, or the vaccinated maybe would burn, would be consumed in the fires of hell. It was all very, very disconcerting. So I must confess that I didn't watch it, but it was, you thought this is a fairly astonishing platform for someone who was our former Chief Justice, and I really didn't agree with it. I don't know, Phumlani, if maybe you agreed with him. I don't know.
What did you think of it? Did you see any of this, Phumlani?
Yeah, I did. I have sort of followed Mogoeng for a while on this, especially over the past 2 years or so. To me, it doesn't come out as someone who's anti-vax. I just think that his views are that people should not be forced to take the vaccine. Now, that does not make him anti-vax. I also believe in that too. That people should not be forced by the state to take the vaccine, to be injected with the medical treatment. And I've taken my vaccines. I've taken all the shots, just like you, Gareth. But I don't believe that we must have the laws and whatever measures we take to force people to take vaccine. And that to me doesn't come out as anti-vax. Now, part of his arguments over the past year or two, including in his encounter with JJ Tabane this week, is that people should be allowed to express what they think, right? Not be sort of be pushed away. In other words, he says that there should be the debate about the matters of the effectiveness of the COVID vaccines, about the debate around the coronavirus itself, around the restrictions and so on. And to me, I don't think that is I don't think such comments or people like that or people who say such things should be demonized and sort of be shunned, be pushed away, be branded as anti-vax. I don't think that's how it comes out.
You make a fair point. I mean, these days it does seem it's completely binary. Like you can't have any nuanced position between mandates on the one hand and anti-vaxxers on the other. It seems that everybody has to belong to one of those categories. You can't be one of those people somewhere in the middle. I mean, I feel personally, I feel a little bit like I was rumbled because I was told that I wouldn't be able to travel. And that was one of my major motivations. I wasn't particularly concerned for my health to get the vaccine. I never worried about COVID from the get-go. And I think anybody who listens to this show knows that. But I did go for the vaccine because I thought, you know what? If they're going to prevent me from traveling because I don't have this thing, then let me go and get it done. And now governments all over the world are starting to drop the necessity for this. They're starting to open up. They're starting to say you don't need masks anymore. This was unnecessary. That was unnecessary. Let's open up. Even governments in places where this was their primary focus for the last 2 years. And I do have to ask you all, because I think we see this happening everywhere now. All of these guys, from Joe Biden to Justin Trudeau to Jacinda Ardern, even to Cyril Ramaphosa, they all started off, and to Cyril's credit, he stuck to it. I mean, I don't think he could force a mandate in this country if he tried, because there'd be an uproar. But all of these guys started off with, let's get the vaccine, but of course it would be wrong of me to force you to. Then somewhere in the middle, they're like, well, we'll give you free hot dogs, or we'll let you take part in a lotto if you get the vaccine. Kind of trying to coerce people in. And many people did. I think most responsible people said, okay, look, I don't want to get sick and I don't want to take the chance of going to hospital. So I'm going to get it anyway. I'll make the right decision for myself. But then somewhere along the way, it became important for these guys to insist on a mandate in some of these countries. And some of them still do insist on this mandate. That's what's going on with this truck protest in Canada at the moment. And I want to know how you guys figure in your heads this move from where government said, look, we're going to bring in the vaccine. We'll make it free. We'll do this for you. We'll try and make it as easy as possible. And it's still up to you to, if you don't get this thing, you're not going to be able to do X, Y, and Z. Because it has changed over time. Giulietta, you go first.
Thanks. Oh gosh. I mean, what's been happening in Canada is fascinating. It's because it's a fascinating encroachment of the state with the trucker protests, where they've now signed into law. They can close down these protesters' bank accounts. So you wouldn't need formally to have had a court order. They don't need that anymore. They can just kind of shut you out of the financial system, which is really an exceptional sort of attack on one's liberties. And in the name of, I suppose, the social good, and I mean, I find that, I do find that disturbing. I mean, I think you're right about South Africa not being able to impose a sort of a countrywide mandate from the states, because there's too much resistance anyway, and I think you would have. But maybe we've been saved to some extent by the fact that there was such community transmission of COVID. So, you know, I mean, I've spoken to a few people at Discovery, and they say that, you know, the seroprevalence is sort of over 70% to 80%. You know, you have had a sort of a fair amount of people being vaccinated, and we've just learned to get on with things, whereas we don't live in a nannying kind of state, such as maybe Canada or New Zealand, certainly.
I don't think we couldn't if we tried, right? Because, and this is our saving grace. And again, I give credit to the townships in South Africa who set the standard for all of us early on and said, we're not going to listen to you, government. We're going to carry on trading. We're going to carry on doing our thing. And thank God, because those communities would have starved and would have run out of resources. In many cases, they did. And everything would have been a colossal fuck up if South Africa had listened to the government from the get-go. I mean, in these other countries where people have listened to the government, those places where they listen are taking the longest to get back economically to where they should. But I don't want to go too much into this, because I mean, who still wants to talk about COVID and vaccines right now, except maybe.
So the cool thing, that the good place to move to is, as we're talking about the economics of not just South Africa, but the world and where we are, you know, and heading, Giulietta, this again is, you know, your area of speciality.
Oh, no. Phumlani, definitely.
Heading into the budget speech.
Well, I'm not the editor of the Financial Mail, so I'm
I'm not the editor of the Financial Mail either. I'm just a mere money editor. Okay.
Hey, money editor is better than any of us who are no editors. But yeah, Pumi's right. Like, the budget coming up
is looking at where we sit in the economics of our country, with high unemployment, with an incredible lack of skills because of our dismal education system. Where to, Quo Vadis? You know, where to from here? What can the minister do for us, if anything? What can small businesses do to turn the situation around? And what can, you know, people like you and I look forward to in this year ahead?
Well, I suppose, you know, what's going to be coming out of next week is, which is probably something that you guys, I imagine that Phumlani and Gareth, I would maybe assume their views on, is the basic income grant. There's going to be news on that. You know, and whether we can afford it, which we can't really, but so I think that's going to be one of the biggest themes to emerge from the budget, whether or not they've that is actually going to be on the cards. I mean, a lot of people are pushing for it, but the cost to the fiscus will be immense, and it can only really be borne if then you get much stronger economic growth, which we show no signs of attaining. I mean, Pumi, you mentioned our incredibly low, and our incredibly low employment figures, are incredibly high unemployment, and this weird concurrent lack of skills. It's sort of a terrible toxic combination, but you really need political will to sort this out. And Cyril yesterday effectively stood by his cabinet and said he absolutely has faith in them, and the
South African people have faith in them, and that's what he said. I mean, it's outrageous. We don't have faith in his cabinet. Who's he talking to?
Stood by his cabinet as he builds a parallel structure within the presidency.
Exactly. If you stand by your cabinet, why are you bringing in Sipho Nkosi and Mvuso Mzimang? Sorry, I'm going all over the place here. Yeah, but you know, we've got a lack of skills. I think maybe a bit of nuance in the critical skills list that's been finalized, which would allow for immigration, to bring in those skills from further afield, isn't the anti-foreigner sentiment that maybe we have feared to come out from the States. So there's clearly, the States, I recognize that it has to kind of try and foster South African jobs growth, at the same time bringing in critical skills from abroad. So hopefully they're doing, they are, I think, awake to this issue. But this is not something that's going to be fixed in next week's budget.
Well, Phumlani, I mean, you've got strong views on what the budget should and shouldn't include, and Giulietta hinted at the social grants, which they're going to obviously try to raise. And I know that the president's promised that there will be further payments made until probably March of next year to people who've been affected by all of the ups and downs of the last 2 years. We're already supporting, if you're a taxpayer in this country, and by taxpayer I mean income taxpayer, you're already supporting like 16 to 17 people that you didn't ask to be responsible for. How much more can each taxpayer take?
Well, that's a great question. Because when you look at our tax base, it's quite very small in South Africa. That's one of the challenges that we face. And add to that the reality that you already have a depressed economy that isn't really growing, right? I mean, I think we last grew about 2% back in 2013 or so. So you have a repressed economy that is not productive. You have the numbers that were, or at least a comment that was made by Phumi, that we have very staggering, shocking unemployment rates. Right now, we're at 47%. If you include people who have given up looking for work. So in other words, we're approaching nearly half of our workforce. Is jobless. And now we struggle to find those kind of unemployment rates in the major emerging markets across the world. So really, the challenge is real. And I mean, next week's budget will basically cover things like, at least will give us an idea around taxes, what's going to happen, because there is, again, as you've just mentioned, Gareth, this talk of, universal basic income grant that government has kept extending the, at least the grant that people have been getting for COVID. It's been getting extended. Now, American economist Milton Friedman, who won a Nobel, he once said, there's nothing, he said something along the lines, there's nothing as permanent as a government's temporary program.
Yes, absolutely.
Whatever looks like temporary. I think I even tweeted last year, Gareth, saying that, this COVID grant, trust me, they always say it's going to be cut off by this date. It's not going to happen.
No.
It's a permanent thing.
Forever.
Yes,
and we can't borrow much more money, can we? I mean, we've got our costs are going up as a country. The state itself, the bureaucracy is a very expensive business. We pay for millions of people in the police and teachers and nurses and all the rest of it. And that's not to mention our over-bloated cabinet, which has already got an honorable or dishonorable mention this morning. We're not talking about cutting costs. We never do. When the finance minister does table his budget, he never says, here's where we're going to find ways to save you money. It's always about where can we get more money to pay for the more things that we're going to put on the menu.
Yeah. I mean, for just in terms of the current social grant, which is the 350 Rand a month social grant, so that's costing us about 50 billion Rand a year. And I think Claire Bissek has written an article in this week's FM just looking at, the affordability of this and a BIG. And I think a 2 percentage point increase in VAT would fund 50 billion Rand a year. But I just don't think they can do that. You can't, taking VAT to 17%. So at least, Phumlani is talking about our incredibly anorexic tax base, but this then would be a tax borne by all South Africans or anyone, doing business in South Africa. But that would be take a heavy toll, and I think you'd have absolute pushback from huge sectors of society.
Especially amongst the poor people. There is an economist, I would like to refer to here, and that is it Isa or Izamshanga or Izamshanga, the guy who is a chief economist at Alexander Forbes. I think his comments over the past day have been quite interesting because, I mean, Mhlanga says we are having wrong conversations, Gareth, right? We are talking about how to basically spend more, how to spend more on social grants. He says that the focus should be how to really bring in structural reforms and how to go about investing, both from the private and public sector, investing in things that can bring productivity into the economy, right? So that people can find jobs, wake up in the morning and go to work, because the social grants debate in South Africa that keeps on being debated. It's not really something that can be sustainable in the country. And I think he has good points.
The guys have no ideas. Unfortunately, what we do see is we don't see any new ideas coming out of the ministry, coming out of treasury, even just ideas of what can we do differently. There's just more of the same. So the idea of taxing more is it's always their first place to go to, is how can we get more taxes out of the people who are paying taxes? And unfortunately, that's not going to work. It's not going to stimulate what we needed to stimulate.
Yeah, because I mean, here's what I sort of, this is my view, that you have to, the spending that has got out of hand over the past, I don't know how long now, a decade and a half or so, the government spending that has continuously increased. There has to be sort of a really concrete, well-crafted plan as to how that gets reduced. Now, to reduce that spending, you will need to put in, it needs to be accompanied by structural reforms. What structural reforms will do is that as you seek to reduce the spending, we are also going to create a productive economy, right? That can encourage investment, that can really create more jobs, so that you have more taxes, right? So you collect more taxes. An economy that produces, where there's stronger economic productivity, so that we see more taxes being paid. So that ought to be the long term. Now they just talk about, all they want is to continue increasing taxes, including running after people who are wealthy.
So it's all good and well that the four of us are sitting here talking about this in theoretical terms, but they're hemmed in by a number of things. Number one, and Giulietta, you could perhaps speak to this too. There is a certain threshold beyond which people become tax evaders. I mean, you can squeeze people to a certain level, and then they start becoming non-compliant. And people who otherwise would have paid their taxes happily find ways of dealing in cash, or they find ways of dealing in underhanded and black market ways that perhaps they wouldn't do if the tax was more fair than that. And I think we're already close to that point. Many people already are doing that kind of thing, I suspect. Certainly there are lots of businesses that run on non-book means, and we know that's part and parcel of South Africa's very striated and varied economy. The other thing is that we talk about them cutting costs, but most of the bills, most of the expenses on the government side are salaries. And they're not going to cut those jobs because they are in bed with the unions. And the unions have said, not only can you not fire people, but you must give them increases that are not always just competitive with inflation, but that outdo inflation very often. I mean, outrageous demands of like double-digit increases year on year for people who work in the public service. And this has happened year after year after year without anyone so much as raising an eyebrow, because we know the ANC and the unions are in bed together. So there's this comfortable relationship they've got. You can't really do much if you're the finance minister. Your hands are tied.
And I mean, the other level that you need to consider is the loyalty, the party loyalty that rests on local government. So in other words, municipal councillors. Mm-hmm. I mean, we know the dire states of municipalities. Every year that seems to get worse. You get the Auditor General's report, which is sort of excoriating in how it details the rot in South Africa's municipalities. But I mean, huge amounts of money, more than 2/3 are spent on municipal salaries. But there's a reason behind that, because these are the kind of the structures that then keep the ANC in power. These municipal jobs are important. They're well paid. And so, I mean, I think toying, trying to break that that sort of stranglehold is that's where you have to break it. Because actually, I mean, Phumlani talks about structural reforms, which always sounds so theoretical, and you think, well, okay, what is a structural reform? Okay, so it's bringing in cheaper broadband by, releasing spectrum to the market, which has been delayed for 15 years. Okay, but higher productivity could be achieved by not having to spend an entire day in a queue at Home Affairs because the systems are down, or where it takes 4 hours to renew your driver's license, or whatever it is. That's where you could get instant productivity gains if those systems just worked properly. And that's not it's not rocket science.
On that note, I don't want to bore the audience who's already heard me going on about this. No, this is a quick story. It'll make you all feel better. I went to the road traffic management people here in Centurion, and I went to renew my driver's license the other day. It took me 10 minutes. It was extraordinarily efficient. Everyone was smiling, happy, great service. And they didn't give me special treatment because everyone got the same thing and everyone got out of there in 10 minutes. It was run like a well-oiled ship. I actually wasn't even sure what had happened to me. I had to pinch myself afterwards. But I made a video saying, you know what, compliments where compliments are due. And I tagged Ikilim Balula, and I tagged, the e-Natus people and all the rest of it. It worked, and I was blown away. Now, obviously, these people are just doing their job, and we shouldn't be praising people for just doing their job, but they did it really well. And it was a surprise because I'm so used to the alternative. And I think there are these shining examples that prove that state apparatus can work. And when it does work, it's so goddamn good. It's phenomenal. Makes you feel like you want to direct as much of your tax money to those people as possible. And I'm not a big fan of tax, but if we're going to spend it, let's spend it on things that work. And I do also think that it's worth noting at this point, the president did make a comment on something which I think both Giulietta and Phumlani and Phumi will all think are probably, it's a bit of a breakthrough. I mean, we know that the president speaks sometimes with a forked tongue, and he says things that he knows people want to hear, whether it's his own supporters, his own comrades, or whether it's the public at large. But he did admit, and this is the first time we've had a president admit this, because most of them have believed that the state can do anything. He did admit that small businesses create jobs, not government. That's a big admission in a State of the Nation address. And I think it does have consequences, because for many people in his own constituency and in his own party, that's never been said to them. They've heard that the state creates jobs and that the state has this unbelievable power to make anything possible. And now finally the rubber's hitting the road, and someone has actually said, and it's the president in this case, actually, we can't make jobs. Businesses have to make jobs. So let's let businesses, and this is obviously the corollary that follows from that, let's leave businesses alone to do what they do.
And he was heckled, I think, quite.
Did he?
You could hear the mutterings in the audience.
Yeah, it was too good to be
Did
true.
he though? Although, Gareth, even as he said that, unfortunately, what that State of the Nation address by Cyril also did was, if you juxtapose what he said in 2018 and what he said this past week, what he said, he's just reset it. He said it once before, and now he's just saying it again, kind of like not going back to say, you remember I said this, and this is how much progress we've done since then. Oh no, he's just come back and he's like said it again. And then he's, asked for more time. Give us time, and we're going to consult, and we're going to put together a social compact with everybody. And then, it's going to have another 100 days of consulting, and then we're going to have a social come on.
But aren't you guys pleased that at least government's going to provide everyone with 10 gigs of free data? I mean, that's obviously going to happen.
Do you know this for a fact, Gareth? I don't know. I think Pumi's being a bit harsh. I mean, like, I think his speech was more. It was definitely more hard hitting that I haven't really heard before. But then he sort of almost immediately slid back, into saying, in his newsletter, well, it's the private sector that creates jobs and a developmental state. And you thought, and I mean, my colleague at the FM, Sam Kokedi, wrote a few opinion pieces on just how he will be hamstrung by his cabinet. So we talked about this already, bringing in these outsiders, Sipho Nkosi and Vuso. But, will they be able to work with the cabinet? I don't know. I mean, if they can bypass them and actually, unblock a whole bunch of things, then that'd be fantastic.
But why does he need that? Why does he need to bring an outsider when he actually has a cabinet that's supposed to do that work?
Yeah.
Like the Department of Small Business is supposed to be cutting why do they need somebody else that has an entire office and an entire support staff and that's going to sit in the presidency so that they can? Then Cyril must do a better job at managing his cabinet. He must do a better job as a manager.
Consider that all of our parastatals, and part of the reason state capture happened so easily was because everyone had consultants everywhere, and the consultants were very often had their own hands in the cookie jar for every deal that was made. So it's not surprising, because what we do in this country is we appoint someone to a position because it looks really good, and we think it makes them important, and then they can feel like they're doing something. But then we inevitably have someone on the side who's being paid even more than the CEO to consult with his huge team of people and who really runs the show. I mean, I'm surprised we don't have a consultant in the presidency actually running the country. I mean, there may even be such a person. Maybe that is what Vuso Msimang is coming for.
Dude, so in one of the Sunday papers, I want to say it was
we pay twice
City
for every
Press.
job.
I want to say it was City Press. They actually had a graphic that has an organogram of what the presidency looks like. The number of people, like Didi Mabuza. When was the last time you saw Didi Mabuza? He's got 4, count them, 4 advisors under him. Like, what the hell does he do?
Advising him in what?
The number of DDGs sitting in the presidency, guys, just the presidency. I'm not talking about all of the various like ministries and who sits in those ministries. So by him bringing in 2 more people that are going to be like, what's his job? Is the red tape cutter? Is that his job? Come on.
Yeah, that's his job. Red tape cutter. You got it right.
and he's such a nice man. I hope he's not going to get sort of chewed up spat out, because
I mean, I think Ramaphosa's speech last week was quite I think on the economy he was right. His comments were right, though of course, as Giulietta is saying, there's been sort of this week in his newsletter he says, well, we also need a developmental backtrack. I think that's the best word to use. But I think when you speak about the Sona last week, I think on the economy he was quite really. He said things that I've never seen him as quite, bold over the years. And also by the fact that, yes, we may be concerned that there's another additional or more appointment with Sipho Nkosi, but Sipho Nkosi is a very reputable, businessman who's accomplished in the country, and I think who's already doing a great job, who has done a great job in the private sector. I give him support, right? Because I think at the end of the day, I want things to be. I would love to see him succeeding in reducing the regulations, the red tape that really are constraining business. Now, the challenge for Ramaphosa is not only in his cabinet, which is usually made up of people. Some of them are like Lindiwe Sisulu, right? So it's also within the ANC itself. Maybe during the weekend, what happened was that the ANC affiliates, or many people in the ANC, they said, "Dude, what did you say on Thursday? What was that?" And then he came back on Monday to tone things down and say, "Actually, you need a developmental state." So I mean, there will be also those constraints within his party, especially as there will be an elective conference in December. I think I was in a webinar with Helen Zil last week, where we're basically reviewing the talking about the Sona, and she was saying, well, what the president said was bold, given the fact that this year he's in a leadership battle. So for him to come out like that early in the year, even though he faces this political kind of conditions ahead, was quite bold from him. So the reference to the elective conference is quite important, and that I believe will constrain him in terms of really effecting the reforms that are needed, and that many in the the ANC world will be opposed to, some people.
Pumi, you've never used the word bold when speaking of Cyril. So I think let's move on. I mean, you even squinting now at, at what Phumlani's saying. Giulietta, I know you have to go because
sorry, I've got to take my daughter to
mom
school.
duty. Yeah, no, and that's much more important. Because trust me,
You can get in the car and phone us back, Giulietta.
No.
One of these days, she's going to have to take over the economy and make it work. So better that she goes to school. Just any other stuff from you, because there's so much on the agenda this week. We're talking about the Sona, obviously, last week, but we're also talking about international stuff. I mean, what do you think, as the money editor at the Financial Mail, what do you think of what you see in America with this rampant inflation? Obviously, the economy is coming back. And that was inevitable. After you shut it down, it's going to come back once you open the tap again. But it's coming back in different places and in dribs and drabs. And obviously some places more successfully than others. But when you've printed as much money as Joe Biden has, the inevitable consequence of that is going to be out of control inflation. And that is what America is going to have to deal with as their primary economic problem going forward. How does this affect ordinary people, and what could its spillover be for us?
So, for ordinary people, they have to pay more for everything. But the great thing in America is that finally wage inflation is picking up. So they're getting paid more to do their jobs, which I think is long overdue. But it's going to mean high interest rates. I don't think we have quite the same runaway inflation here, although PPI in December of 10.8%, CPI was sort of still within the target band. So that's going to start, there's a lag. So that's saying what's coming down the track. It does have to mean higher interest rates. So you're just going to pay more for your debt. It's for people who've enjoyed an absolute stonking 18 months since the bottom fell out of the stock market in March 2020, it's going to mean a bit of a screeching halt, I think, for the highly priced stocks where the promise of growth is big rather than the evidence of growth. In other words, like a Netflix or companies that are investing hugely in order to make earnings down the line, suddenly they become less valuable. What is valuable now is a company with earnings and with cash in the business and low debt. Those are the valuable companies. And so they tend to be the more boring companies. So if you have a stock share portfolio, those are the companies that are probably going to do okay. But the FANGs, well, not all of them, but the highly priced tech stocks that you've been buying and done well out of, you've seen if anything wobbles, the stocks get punished. So if you've had quite a fun time trading these things in the last 2 years, it's not so fun right now for you. But America's really sort of snookered. It's got itself into a really difficult position. And I spoke to this really fascinating. The author of this book, David Buckham, it's called The End of Money, and he just says that it's criminal what the Federal Reserve. So you say Joe Biden, shame, it's not all Joe's fault. It's the Federal Reserve has been doing this since.
It's probably none of it's Joe's fault. I mean, he doesn't know whether he's a teapot or a hockey stick most of the time. But what you're doing, Giulietta, I mean, I know that this is cheeky of me, but you seem to be arguing for cryptocurrencies that aren't controlled.
I'm not. I am not. I'm totally sorry. I don't understand. I don't understand. I still cannot wrap my head around something that only goes up in value because other people want it. To me, that is still the essence of what a cryptocurrency is, and then it falls because people have had to unwind positions. What is its intrinsic value? I still don't know. And I know the arguments against fiat currency as well. You believe the dollar is it's just a faith-based currency, but there's an economy behind it. Okay, so I don't know. No, I'm not arguing for cryptocurrencies, and you might find cryptocurrencies don't do particularly well this year either. I'm sort of arguing for boring.
I like the idea of a decentralized means of us creating a thing to trade with, where we don't have to rely on governments who have clearly let everyone down. If anything, this pandemic has taught us anything, it is that the promises of government are more worthless than ever, and that usually decisions they're made when pushed into a corner are going to be the worst possible decisions that will have much more devastating impacts on us than if we trust government and expect them to save us and keep us safe.
But this lack of faith in maybe governments or financial systems. Okay, so I know I'm reverting to this book, but it was a really fascinating read, and they argue that this lack of trust is a terrible thing because financial institutions like banks have funded economic growth for centuries because you have trust in them and you have the sense of a counterparty on the other side. So to not have trust in that system, which is why we have the proliferation of cryptocurrencies, it undermines democratic projects. It does so much to sort of...
Julietta, they're not going to regain our trust by behaving like, for example, Trudeau is now, by seizing people's assets because they disagree with them. This is not how you build trust. So all it's going to do is chase people further and further away from governments. And I couldn't imagine a better possible outcome. I know Phumlani will agree with me on this, being a bit of a libertarian. The less government has to do with us, Phumlani, the better, right?
Of course, no, I do. But I mean, the question is, I get what you are saying, Giulietta. This thing that people are losing trust in the institutions of democracy. But then the question is, with the rise of the cryptocurrencies, are people being worse off? And I'm talking about the people's livelihoods or standards of living. And the fact that things have been improving over the past decades or so, right? In absolute kind of terms. We have seen poverty reductions. We've seen, life expectancy going up. We've gotten around many diseases. So there has been that kind of progress. So for us, us losing faith in institutions, so long as we have things or alternatives that can sustain us, and if they come from us as citizens and government doesn't have control of them, I think that's good. Was what politicians love to do, and that's what they are still doing. They are still finding ways that they can regulate, cryptocurrencies.
I'm going to let Giulietta go, guys, because she has to do
no,
mom duty.
I'm sorry I have to go, but I
no
really enjoyed this, and thank you very much for inviting me onto the show. I really appreciate it.
It's always great to see you, and we've got lots to talk to Phumlani about, so you can listen in the car.
Okay. All right. Cheers.
You, Giulietta. Nice to see you. Giulietta Talevi from Financial Mail. She's the editor, the money and investing editor at the Financial Mail, also presents a show called Stockwatch on Business Day TV. You can find her at G Talevi on Twitter. So Phumlani and Phumi, lots of people want to know about this. I know you've got something to talk about here when it comes to just the theatrics of all of this and what it means for South Africa, because we can take the glib view that this is pure entertainment, but the EFF and AfriForum had a little showdown yesterday. It was the right versus the left. And even for
yesterday was the 7th day. The showdown's been going on for 7 days.
Fair enough. It sounds like, according to the comments too this morning, that's what people want to talk about. So, Phumlani, did you watch any of this, or are you disinterested?
Well, I did see a few clips here. It's I think there's a great deal of generalizations amongst us as people. We tend to think that, one group of people thinks this way, and therefore you can't have people who think differently within that group, within that racial group, right? That's what I'm sensing. Having listened to Julius Malema, the leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters, that he assumes that, each and every he makes assumptions about people. I think he mentioned the word baboon, that white people, they tend to look at black people as baboons and other kinds of, racist, derogatory, kind of comments or thinking. So, for me, I think that is very dangerous to sort of group people, see them as collective, rather see people as individuals and judge them on that. Because not everybody will be the same in a specific racial group. I think if we go down that line, we will really be sort of causing destruction to our country and dividing it even more further.
Yeah, Phumi, you said earlier this morning, you made the kind of the funny reference to Ikleva Nibari and what you think Julius Malema is. But there is something about this that kind of people, whenever we're in good times, we worry less about this stuff. But when things are tough, and for most people in this country, they are tough, we tend to think much closer to home. We tend to become a little more tribal, even if we think we're better than that. And maybe there is something about this that is fascinating, because we're holding up a mirror to the extremes of South Africa in some way, right? We're looking at communities who are quite distant from each other. I mean, there couldn't be two people more polar opposite than Ernst Rutz and Julius Malema, right? I mean, there are obviously things that they have in common, but ideologically, they couldn't be further apart. And I wonder how much of it is real and how much of this is that posturing that we see in politics so much of the time. It's kind of AfriForum using this as an opportunity to show up Julius and the EFF, and the EFF and Julius using this as an opportunity to show up AfriForum.
There's a third part to it. And the third part to it is the mirror that's also being held up is the mirror to the society that we've all become. You know, you said earlier that we're, in a way, glibly looking at it like it's some kind of entertainment. But that's also how all of us on the outside have become. Everything has become reality TV, right? Everything is about kind of this visceral response to what you're watching.
Yeah.
And how you're watching it and how you're consuming it. And it really has eroded a level of decency. For lack of a better word, it's eroded the level of decency that we as human beings, as a society, also require for us to be able to move forward. You know, just watching yesterday's showdown. Okay, let me not start with yesterday. Let me say 7 days ago when it all started, right? So when the guys first arrived at court, and when the day adjourned and they had to leave, outside the court precinct was a whole lot of EFF supporters chanting and singing, and they were unable to leave. They were unable to leave the court precinct because of kind of the jeering and what was happening. On the second day, and they were singing, guess what? Kill the farmer. And on the second day, for the proceedings to begin, they actually had to start by saying to the judge, listen, we need some kind of protections here, because this is what happened to us. And here's the video of what happened as we were leaving. And it's just...
Yeah. Can I say something here, Gareth? And I'll be blunt here now. You know, as per my usual tweets and comments I've made over the past years. And you know, whether we as Black people, and I'm going to speak as a Black person now, you know, whether we, us as Black people, whether white people like us or not, you know, really at this point, to me, I think it's not significant. What is significant in a democratic society that is ours, it's about how do we go about improving our own lives, right? There is the facts are clear. And I do not ever dispute the fact that we do live in a society that is unequal, right? In other words, even racial inequality still exists. It does exist. The question is, how do we move towards, you know, creating a society where we see people getting jobs? That's why I believe in an economy that is productive. How do we go about, you know, people getting good education? How do we go about, you know, resolving, especially us Black people, the fundamental issues that we face, including the family breakdown? When you look at, you know, absent fathers, fatherlessness, you know, in the country, it amongst the Black people, our population, it's at a staggering, you know, level. Last time I checked, only 32% of kids live with their fathers. So, and the global research is clear on how important the nuclear family is when it comes to achieving prosperity. So, I mean, if we also need to, I mean, also skills development as well. We need to get those things right, regardless of whether other racial groups like us or not. If we can get those fundamental things right, then we will prosper in a democratic South Africa. I don't see any...
This is where Pumi's right. It's almost like this thing is a sideshow. And I mean, it's obviously, I don't think anybody is in any state of confusion about the fact that going around saying kill the whoever is a good idea. I think that that's what the case is about. And hopefully, you know, if anything, like Pumi was saying, the behavior of the crowd outside of the court and the fact that had to be entered into evidence the very next day proves that this is the kind of behavior that is uncalled for in a sensible, sober society that wants to do the things that you've just mentioned, Phumlani. But the fact is, it is a sideshow. All of this is, even though it gets the most attention, the things that you're talking about never get any attention because they're not sexy subjects. It's much easier to say, oh, well, you look at these guys, there's a hate speech or whatever, there's racism. Racism and hate speech get lots of attention. Fatherlessness, joblessness, these things don't get attention. They're not exciting subjects.
Yeah, and by the way, when you look at the polls that have been done, right? When it comes to the fundamental problems South Africans are concerned about, whether it's security, jobs, service delivery, and so on, these matters of racism, if to be specific, they tend to be at the bottom, right? Now, that can be, to many people, that's usually a controversial statement to say, but it is a reality that people, they want to talk about the things that affect them every day. So what you see between AfriForum and the EFF, it's really it's not something that really, it's not a conversation that is important or significant to most people in the country.
But it gets attention. I mean, Pums, if you had to...
Yeah, it's wrong. It's wrongful attention, I should say. I mean, we are focused on things that are not important, which is what I've been saying over the past years.
But then, I mean, Twitter is always a good barometer for what's really stupid and what people are interested in, even though it's not important. And people are. They're interested in, like, which celebrity secret Mac G has found out this week and that kind of thing. And that's okay. But this thing keeps on being something that people are seemingly distracted by.
The distraction that it also creates is one that allows us to be angry at the wrong problems, right? So it allows us to be angry at a particular thing and not what we should be angry about. So I am unemployed, I live in my kids can't get to the school, or we don't have prospects, and of course at that moment, and crime and of course at that moment it is so much easier to also be ignited into being so angry and so vitriolic about the cause of the situation that I am in, rather than how do we fix where we are in. And that's what Julius Malema and the EFF are very good at doing. Is they're very good at saying the cause of your problems is X, rather than this is how we're going to solve the problems. As much as.
But you see, the thing is, you see, even the cause, when they say the cause of your problems is X, it's usually the wrong X in my view, right? They don't talk about the fundamental issues that I've just mentioned.
It doesn't matter.
They hardly go there.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, because if you're able to stir up my anger, you're able to stir up my anger about a particular thing, whether it's 1 of 10, if this is the one that quickly sticks, and that's what Julius is. Julius is able to be this gladiator, as it were. He is able to, and you see it every day. So this week he may stand for the brothers and sisters coming from Africa, and next week he is banging down the doors of people and saying, I want to see the ratios of who's local and who's in. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's able to do all of those things, and that is all of it. All of it is about a misdirection. It's a look away from the things that you should be looking at. So nobody is having a conversation about VPS and their involvement in the looting over there as the cases come to court. As those cases are coming to court, right? See how much they have ramped up all of this anger and this vitriol around people's poverty and what the poverty and what they believe the source of that poverty is. Because now you're not talking about VPS. Now you're not talking about the looting that's happened over there. That's all I'm saying about what that is.
And Gareth, maybe you need to have a chat with him in person.
Listen, I wouldn't say we're friends, but I do occasionally speak to him, and I find him a very interesting human being. But it is interesting also from the objective point of view to look at when he is hemmed in and he is forced to give serious answers to questions. Like, for example, the way Mark Oppenheimer, and I didn't watch this, but I'm gathering from what Pumi told me this morning and what I'm reading in the reports that I've seen on this case, when Mark Oppenheimer puts him in a position where he cannot dispense with just rhetoric and posturing and nonsense, and he's required to account for himself, he is very often found lacking. And I do think that we should be able to do that with our politicians from all stripes more. We should be able to hold them all to account for what they say and make them responsible for what they say. And this is precisely why, although I don't really care which way this goes, I've already said how I feel about, hate speech and saying kill the Boer, and I think we all agree on that. But to me, it's a good example of where a politician's feet are held to the fire, and they can't just say something to get away or to stoke up, anger, as Pumi rightly puts it. But they're actually forced to say, okay, you said this, what do you mean? No one ever has those follow-up questions. The media don't do their job. The media don't go, what do you actually mean when you say this?
One in one of the Sona debates, a response that Ronald Lamola, and it sounded very funny when he said it, is Ronald Lamola calling Julius Malema the supreme leader of the EFF. Yeah. And which, it's again, we keep talking about it, but kind of very quickly get distracted by his antics. The kind of, because there is no discounting that there is a little bit of, charismatic nature to who he is. He is very alluring, and he is able to kind of build and get all these people behind him. The thing, the Mail and Guardian this week's Mail and Guardian actually has a big feature on Julius Malema because he was expelled from the ANC 10 years ago, right? So then he was expelled from the ANC, and that was the precipitator of starting the EFF. And fascinating to see how the EFF then positions that thing over the weekend as in saying, Julius Malema left the corrupt ANC 10 years ago. And this is, so this is, for me, these are all of the little signs. And earlier when I was saying to you that I do hope that people are also not just watching this for the spectacle that it is, but also kind of deciphering for themselves if this is the kind of leader that you believe you want to cast your vote for. So if you're saying the corrupt ANC and I don't believe in the DA and Action XA and da-da-da-da, and I'm going to give my vote to the EFF, is this kind of leadership the leadership that you want? Not just for your party, but for your country as well. It's and I mean he's rude and he's brash and he's all of those various things, and also looks down on so many people in so many ways. Is this the kind of leadership? Even as an opposition leader, by the way, as an opposition leader, these are the things that we must be thinking about.
That's maybe a good point to leave it on, because we're all going to have to answer that question at some point. What kind of leader do we want? Phumlani, it's always good to have you on. Any parting shot from you before we go?
Well, I think for me, I would agree with what Phumi is saying. I mean, in terms of leadership, it really, he's a character we can all kind of, assess and think things through as to, do we really want this person to be the leader of South Africa? So as he does these things, we need to reflect on that as well. And I get very surprised as to how really people have been, those who have been voting for them over the past years, how have they really been voting for such a character, even the character of the party itself. But we shall see how it goes. As I'm not really much interested in this, Gareth. I'm interested in fundamental issues that can get every South African, a better life out there, not some side showing, things that aren't really that fundamental to our progress.
Well, I mean, it's always fascinating to hear your point of view, and thank you also to Giulietta, who joined us a little earlier on. Phumlani and Giulietta and Pumi Mashiko, thank you all very, very much.
We haven't had that lunch, man. We haven't.
Didn't you have your car stolen, and then
I had hijacking, and then things just shut out during December. But I'm keen to get back to it.
I do owe you lunch. Let's do it. You tell me when.
Yes, definitely.
Right. Very good. Thanks, Phumlani. Nice to see you. Thanks, everybody. We will see you tomorrow at 6 a.m. bright and early. And if you like The Burning Platform, don't forget to join us next Thursday, same time, same place, with Phumi and I. And we'll look after you as we go into the next week of craziness that is South Africa and the world. Very nice. We'll see you tomorrow.